First of all, I have to say you're so handsome. Emily, your wife, just lucked out when in that department.
You're very kind.
I've seen your pictures all over the place. A lot of people love you and talk about you hold you in high esteem. So I'm so thankful that you're here today. You have a love story.
I do have
But,
a love story.
but before we talk about that, just will you tell me a little bit about yourself? I mean, where were you born and raised? And
Well, I was telling John, your tech guy, that I'm sitting in a Catholic high school that is literally across the street from the public high school that I went to. So I grew up in Pittsburgh. My parents still live in the house that I grew up in, and so I'm a Pittsburgher, a Yinzer, I suppose is our affectionate nickname. And I went to the University of Pittsburgh and eventually Franciscan University of Steubenville, and then I backed my way into teaching high school and moved out to Pottsville, Pennsylvania, which I didn't know existed until I was hired to teach there. And I taught there for 5 years, and then I moved to Greenville, South Carolina, and a little Catholic Mecca down there. And Father Dwight Longenecker and Joseph Pierce and
yes, love them, love
other
them.
notables are down there. Lots of good people. So I spent 6 years there from 2001 to 2007, and then I guess I was 38. I was 38, and I got an offer to come back to Pittsburgh and work for the Diocese of Pittsburgh. So that was kind of it's either you move back now or you're probably not moving back at all. And so my parents were getting older, and it seemed like a somewhat interesting proposition to work in middle management in the church. And so I came back and I did that from 2007 to 2019. And then in 2019, I got a call. I'd been in middle management for 12 years and was kind of itching to do something else. And our current principal, Lauren Martin, called me and she said she was looking for a religion teacher. And so one of my jobs as I guess I was the director of Catholic Identity at the time, was to vet potential religion teachers. And I think I somewhat jokingly said, well, what about me? And she's like, really? And I said, yeah, let's talk about that. So she brought that up. So I took that as a sign from God. And so I left the diocese, the chancery and middle management, as I like to call it, and came back, and I've been teaching high school since 2019 at Seton LaSalle in Pittsburgh.
What are the subjects that you mostly were teaching all those years?
Well, my first years, when you teach high school religion, you tend to be a generalist, so I think in my 5 years at Nativity of Blessed Virgin Mary High School in Pottsville, I might have taught freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors at any given point, so intro, New Testament, Old Testament, sacraments, morality, church history, which can be a tough sell for high schoolers, Catholic social teaching, vocations. And really for the first 11 years of teaching, every year I taught Catholic morality and sacraments, which became my favorite. I think I got better and better at that. And
what do you love most about teaching high school kids?
Well, you're getting them at an impressionable age. I think, I look at my own life and, somewhat traditional Catholic upbringing. I was one of 4 kids. I was born in 1968. And, so the 80s, I graduated high school in 1986. And, catechesis wasn't very strong. My parents were faithful Catholics, maybe, and most especially, I became proud of them after the fact once I got old enough to have this conversation with them, but they never used contraception, even in the 1970s and 80s when, lots of people were capitulating on that. So I was very proud of them for holding the line on that. But, it was, any family, we were Catholic, and going to Mass was non-negotiable. But by the time we were teenagers, the family prayer time had disappeared, and there were some family issues, and so just meandering, not really identifying strongly as a Catholic. I mean, I think if somebody had asked me at the time, do you love Jesus? And, no, of course, I love Jesus, and I had a childhood faith, and even had a little period of fervency, which was very furtive in my, sophomore, junior, or my freshman, sophomore year of high school. I occasionally would open the Bible that my grandmother, who was a daily communicant, had given me, and I would read from the book of Sirach, and had little inklings of maybe that I wanted to be a wise person, although I didn't quite know what that was. I like to tell the story. I never used to tell the story, but I realized, no, I should tell the story. Is at some point I was inspired to hug Jesus goodnight. So as a young teenager, and so I would I would just hug myself, but with the intention, man,
Right.
I'm embracing myself, but my intention is to hug Jesus. And one night I got a response, a
Oh,
response. So
oh,
I would say for, I don't know, 20 or 30 minutes, I just felt bathed in the love of God, felt it, knew it. And then I think I like to refer to it as I was scarred by beauty. The impression I had was the clouds parting in a very clear sky with great clarity. And certainly not that I understood the world or anything like that, but I had a deep interior sense that I was loved and that everything made sense. So not that I understood how everything made sense, but really like at a deep level that everything does make sense. And so that was a profound experience. Now I also like to
huge.
reflect. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, no, that's huge. That's a huge grace right there.
Yeah, it's huge, but it's really untethered to any kind of formation or anything. So I was somewhat drifting away from the church. I would go to mass, but sometimes I would go play video games at a convenience store and bring the bulletin home. So it's interesting to me that God lavished this grace on me, but I didn't really know what to do with it, and continued kind of just, not to excuse myself, but doing what lots of teenagers do. You kind
Right.
of, you maybe want this, but you don't know how to articulate this. And so, to answer your question, what I really do like about teaching high schoolers is, over the years, I've been able to approach sort of from the angle of what would I like to have known when I was in high school. What kinds of things do I think, had I heard them, maybe I would have responded to them. Maybe I wouldn't have responded to them, but
Right.
it would have been important for me to hear it. And then, my moral responsibility would have been upped because somebody had told me something important, and at least that was there to be wrestled with. So high schoolers, just proclaiming the gospel, talking about Jesus, encouraging them to try to look at life through that lens, talk about, the reception of Holy Communion, confession, really the basics, but occasionally also trying to introduce them to deeper thinking, from mature thinkers about the faith, and try to slide that in there. And yeah, so I mean,
Good.
it's a
That's
great
good.
opportunity. Yeah.
So it seems like to me a good blend for that would be your childhood emotional real experience of the hug, but
Hmm.
also the deep intellectual structure that our church offers in the
Right.
intellectual. So we need both, and I know that when we're way in one extreme or the other, it's not attractive. Nobody's
Hmm.
attracted to either one. So
Yeah.
well, that's good. Okay, so you get out, you're dating. Did you, when you were young and went out on your own, were you looking to get married right away, or what were you thinking about marriage when you were in your early 20s?
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, when I teach the seniors now in vocation, I really try to stress that, most of them have a vocation to marriage.
Mhm.
Certainly there's religious or priesthood in there, but, just from a number standpoint, many of them are called to marriage. So I guess I wanted to get married, but it wasn't very firm, or, what that would look like. So I certainly didn't have a plan. It's important for my story, so here, God lavishes me with this grace. But when after my freshman year of high school, I'm sorry, my freshman year of college, I went away to Cedar Point, and I met a girl there, and we basically for 2 years lived together. Okay, so she was a fallen away Catholic, I was a fallen away Catholic at that point. So for a year, I just stopped going to mass. We did, formally live together for 1 year, and then we basically lived together, for another year. So use your imagination, or
No, no,
the sins that are attached to that. I think nothing,
no, no, no.
nothing.
None of us are going to be surprised.
Yeah,
I know. The older
right.
you get, the more you realize we all have those things.
So that
Yeah,
was my experience. And then, so that was, what, 86, 87, 88. So at that point, I was really a fallen away Catholic, but then I was not happy, especially in that first year of the relationship. And that young lady went off to Germany for the summer. And that was my first time back to confession. So I decided to go to confession. Now, again, it was kind of trying to figure out what this was, because we ended up living together the next year with some idea of living chastely, and just very naive about the whole thing. But, that was my first,
right.
come back to it. And I guess one of the ironies of God's providence, was I started attending the Newman Center at Pitt, a wonderful group of oratorians. And so, you alluded to the emotional and the intellectual, but they offered on Wednesday evenings, we would have mass and then we would have dinner and then there would be a talk about the faith. And so they gave me some real structure about what the faith was. And I remember the young lady I was dating at the time, she's the one that suggested we go to that. And I was kind of like, I'm too cool for school. I don't want to go to this, I don't want to go to this Wednesday night, a holy roller, whatever I was presuming it was, so it was really her idea to go. And sadly, I mean, we broke up and she felt it just stopped coming. But I really found a group of friends there, and the priest eventually lived with the Oratorians for 7 or 8 months, doing a little discernment of priesthood and obviously discerned out. But that was very healing for me too, just to get some structure, not just to the Wednesday night group, but to live with a group of men who were serious about Christ and holiness, learned how to pray the breviary, had some stability in my life.
Yeah, I know a lot of people hate structure. They use the word rigid and confining, and there's no freedom and there's no
Mhm.
creativity. But the loosey goosey thing without form would be like a human person with no skeleton. We'd be a lump of fat and skin on the ground,
Right.
right? And I know that structure for me too, structure gives shape and form to those beautiful experiences that you had and the dreams that you have. So I
Yeah.
love that you're using the word structure. I don't care because my audience usually are the older Catholics,
Hmm.
and we should appreciate structure by now. So if any of you out there are still like hoping that things will be all loosey goosey, no, we need the structure. So anyway, that's my little platform thing there.
Yeah,
Go.
somewhere there's a great quote from Benedict. I think it's in Space Salvi. It's in one of his encyclicals. I swear it's there, but he says love needs to be organized, which really struck me. I mean, love does organize. God creates an ordered universe. Now, again, that can be overdone. I mean, there could be a kind of order that does get restrictive, but I think true creativity flourishes within structure. So a
Yeah.
song.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I think about this a lot too in regards to that. Look at God's first act in the in creation was to bring order out of chaos.
Hmm.
How many of us have a chaotic life? Right.
I mean, I have. I don't
Right.
know. Hopefully
Right.
not
So
now.
no, grace, order is good. So anyway, so now you're maturing a little bit and your heart is being pulled in, closer
Yeah.
to God, but you're still
Yeah, so that was pretty definitive. I mean, in 1989, once I came back to the faith, that was it. And
good.
I was convinced, and I mean, I think that was maybe one of the residual graces from that initial encounter with Christ, and just Catholicism, and my parents' faithfulness, my grandmother. So when I came back, I didn't really flirt with Protestantism or anything. Of course, I go back to confession. I just start practicing the faith. So that
Good.
was, I never looked back after that. I dated, different young women. It was my early 20s, and
Oh, okay. Hold that thought. Hold that thought. I have
yeah,
a question.
please.
What kind of women are you attracted to? What kind of women were you dating? Tell me about, like, did you have a type or did you have a look or a personality that you were drawn to?
Oh. I mean, maybe in the abstract, but I full of life. I like laughter and just uh, somebody who's engaged in the world. I liked foreign films and that even early on that had kind of emerged. In fact, that was one of the nice things about the young woman whom I had the unhealthy relationship with, but that was something that was good out of it. She was kind of an intellectual of a sort, and that woke me up to certain things.
Hmm,
And so I continued down that path even after, so I owe her a debt of gratitude, on that front. Yeah, so types, it's good. It was just a group of friends, at the oratory. I'd say there were probably maybe 30 of us kind of orbiting the oratory. So there's, a young woman that I ended up dating twice. Obviously, we didn't get married, and then her friends. I mean, later on, you know, it's so funny. I mean, all these years collapsed together, but I did end up getting engaged in 1998 to one of those young women from that
group.
circle. So I had gone to Steubenville and dated some women there, and yeah, so just trying to sort it out. I mean, I went to grad school at Franciscan from '93 to '96. And I mean, obviously there were lots of devout young women who were lovely and great personalities, and So actually, that was kind of funny for me as a young man. So when you're in the world and you're looking for a devout Catholic, that can narrow down the choices. But then you go to Steubenville, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's there's 500 wonderful women here. How does one even choose to date this person,
Right.
that
So
person?
yeah, you have to go where they are. Catholic Match just put another a fun video out there about hunting. If you're hunting for deer, you go where the deer are hanging out, right?
Right,
So
right.
if you're looking for where do good Catholic women hang out, and that's where you want to go.
Their
Go ahead.
church.
Oh,
Yeah.
let's go back to you were engaged,
Yeah.
without the gory details, but what happened to that relationship?
Yeah, I rushed into it. I think we got engaged before we should have, which is my fault because I proposed. I thought because we had been friends for, I don't know, maybe at that point, maybe 8 years, uh, that we knew each other well. And we did, I mean, to some extent. But when you start dating, that's a whole another level. And I think I was naive. And, so maybe your question about wanting to get married. I mean, once I came back into the church and, kind of had every so often, I think about priesthood, but, I always came back to the answer, I think I'm supposed to be married. And so I wanted to be married. And at that point, I was almost 30, 28, 29. And, lots of my friends at Steubenville were married and, the undergraduates were getting married. And, that's the season of marriage, for many of
Right.
us, is in the 20s. And all of a sudden it was, I'm leaving my 20s. So, not that, as a man, I was feeling the clock ticking, but
Right.
you
Right.
have certain ideas like, well, I'd love to have 5 or 6 children. Well, if my wife and I got, if this woman and I got married, and I think she was maybe a year older than I was, you're just doing the math, like, well,
Right. Right.
maybe have a child every other year, don't know, but all of a sudden you're like, well, we're kind of 40. As you get older, the years collapse and you start to
Right.
see that. I try to impress upon my young students. I mean, they're 18 years old, so I doubt it resonates, but I say, for a woman, especially once she hits her early 20s, is probably thinking in groups of years. So you just meet a man and she's 23 and says, well, if this works out, maybe we'll date a year or maybe a year and a half or 2 years. So I'm really 25 and then we're engaged and maybe that takes a year. So I'm 23, but I'm really 26, and of course that intensifies as you get older, so if
Hmm.
you're thinking about children and marriage, and obviously as Catholics, those things are tied together, especially when you're young. So yeah, we got engaged, and I started realizing some things about the relationship, maybe about myself, but also her family. Again, it's a long time ago, and
Right.
don't
Right.
want to
Right.
reveal her thing, but her family, some issues that I really didn't. I mean, I think one of my faults of my youth was I was cavalier about certain things. I mean, I took things seriously, but at the same time, I was kind of married to a cavalier spirit where I thought, things were maybe simpler than they actually were. So in the real
Yes.
world of dating, like, wow, we'll just, let's, we've known each other this long, let's get married. And then, reality does hit. And so some issues cropped up, which I hadn't anticipated. And so in that one, because I've been engaged 3 times and I'm only married once. Uh, I decided that we would break it off. So obviously that was traumatic, I think, for both of us.
Yes.
And of course, I don't know. I mean, there's a kind of, when you're the one breaking it off, there's, you suffer certain things, and of course the other person. So I've been on both sides of that. And but we did call it off, and we kind of went our separate ways after that. I haven't seen her for many years now, and I think just incidentally after a while, because I was in Pottsville and she was in Pittsburgh, and then she moved to another city, and so we just moved out of each other's lives.
I think it's a grace. It's painful, but it's a grace that you didn't force it to move forward. That you followed some intuitive thing, or because I deal with the people. A lot of the people who are watching this have been married and divorced,
Mm-hmm.
and their story is very similar. They knew there was something wrong, and yet it was the time they were approaching 30. They had nowhere else to go, and the cavalier attitude, like you're saying, it should be easy. What's the. So we haven't really talked about some of these important things, but that's okay
Right.
because God will love us. We're getting married in the church, and they run into horrible situations after that. So okay, so now, how old were you when you met Emily? And where'd you
Well,
meet
okay,
Emily, your
let's
wife?
make sure to say I did get engaged a second time in there. So Emily and I met in 2005 on Catholic Match, but there was an engagement again, which I was very much at fault. I rushed it, and I thought I was prepared. This lovely woman lived in Rome actually at the time, and we were introduced through friends, and so we it was somewhat like a Catholic Match. Um, you know, situation because she was in overseas and we were
Right,
writing letters back and forth. And so that was very intense and we fell in love very quickly. And again, I just lost my head on this. And so after
right.
the fact, so that went haywire. That was 2001 into the summer 2002, and we didn't survive, the early pressure we put on the relationship with her moving back to the States, and we really didn't know each other. And I think both of us came to that realization. So that fell apart. And so at that point, I was 33. And that was crushing for me because I really
Mm,
thought after the first engagement, I thought I
mm.
maybe had gained some wisdom, but clearly I hadn't. I was presented with a new situation, and now I was in Greenville, South Carolina at the time, and so that was humiliating. I mean, I was just humiliated to the core of my being. I was just, I felt like I had failed as a man, and wasn't able to bring that to fruition, and realizing that really it was my fault for proposing so early. And of course she said yes, but you're the man, and she's entrusting herself, and so we just didn't survive that. And so I was 33, and then I would call that the years like of wandering for me, really. So there were some women in there, but Emily and I met in 2005. I forget how long I was on Catholic Match, maybe from 2004. I'm not sure, maybe 2003. It's been a while, so I can't remember.
So yeah,
But
20 years ago. Yeah.
yeah, so we're coming up on 20 years of knowing each other. But I saw her picture, and I thought I don't know, there was something about her that I thought looked wifey, like to me, like you could imagine, like, oh, I think the picture that caught my attention was with like four of her friends, so it was a group photo. I mean, I
Mm.
remember, I mean, just as an insight, there were, I mean, lots of interesting women and obviously attractive women, but I remember
You,
one, and I can't even remember her name, but it was just photo shoots of her by herself, and she was lovely. I mean, she was a really gorgeous woman, but as a man, I was like, all of these photos are her by herself. Like, that seems a little disordered, and it could be, who knows? You don't know the person for real. And so,
right, right.
but her judgment about how to present herself, which is a whole issue with that kind of dating, is, it's not just bumping into somebody at the donuts after church and just talking with them. There's a PR element to it, and that you might be gifted at that or maybe not. So
Yeah, okay, good, good, good. We talk about this all the time on
yeah,
Catholic
I'm
Match.
sure you do. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't just throw up a picture and write a paragraph. Yeah, good,
Yeah, I
good.
mean, there's some, yeah, the forum demands some kind of presentation.
Do you still have that first picture that you remember so clearly of Emily?
Oh, probably. Yeah, I'm sure she has it somewhere. I mean, I don't have it. I mean, I'd be able to identify it if I saw it, but yeah,
Okay,
it
so
was
we know
actual, it was a
we
photo. It
know
was
that you like lively, energetic, full of life, engaged women. And Emily certainly is that.
She
So
is, yes.
you were
Yeah.
drawn to that. So how did you have a date? Were you friends? How did that
Well, we
happen?
wrote, I mean, I think we started writing in August, if I remember correctly. And then we actually had our first date on October 22nd, excuse me, which turns out in retrospect, because we both have a devotion to St. John Paul II, that's his feast day. So that's, it's interesting. So now the thing that worked for us is we did have some mutual friends. And even though, so it was Catholic Match, and I'd written her, and she still has these that we haven't looked at them for a long time, but they're out there somewhere. I should look at them to refresh
Yes, you
my
should.
memory, and probably be embarrassed about various things, I'm sure. But uh, we decided to meet. I mean, and that was something I learned fairly early. I thought it was very important to meet the person, if possible, fairly early in the process, if there was some interest, because
Yes.
writing, just like PR. Now, my wife is a great writer. I mean, she's a writer, and I'm not a great writer, but I can write a decent email and stuff. But it's still a way of communicating with usually somebody that you've not met in person. And it really is remarkable, the difference between meeting somebody in person initially. I mean, just what can be gleaned in 5 or 10 minutes of talking to somebody. I mean,
Right.
I mean, we're embodied beings. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be
Right.
ultimately. I mean, the goal is not to write letters for our entire lives, or
Right.
text, because things have changed even since we got married and got off Catholic Match and things. But we're embodied beings, so being in the presence of the person is the goal. So I think without it being awkward, and she lived in Steubenville and I was from Pittsburgh, so me coming home was just a normal thing. I would come back and visit my parents. So at some point there, we decided that we should meet, and we had a very nice first date. And here's where I really have to say this, because I know it hurts Emily's feelings sometimes when we talk about this, but I was not smitten with her. And so it's hard because I love my wife and I am attracted to my wife. But on our first meeting, whatever that it factor is, and again, I think maybe that's overdone. People are nervous and whatever. I mean, we had a really nice date. I mean, it went well, and we went into Pittsburgh, and I mean, we actually went to mass at St. Bernard's, and we went. It was a pretty long date. I mean, if Dr. Carrie Cronin from the Dating Project is watching, she would say, "You broke all the rules. You spent way more than $10 and spent more than I think she's 90 minutes, and get out on her first date." Have you ever seen the Dating Project?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Well,
I'm okay, very familiar with it, but
okay, but I love that you said you weren't smitten in that sense with her immediately,
yeah,
because this just goes to show, don't give up after, go for a second or third date
right.
before you just never know.
Well, and this is, so this is the long road then. I mean, we settled into what we term now as the ambiguous friendship. And even still, we'll celebrate our eighth anniversary this summer, but there are occasionally times where we're reminiscing. And I was like, well, I don't remember that. She said, well, we weren't talking then. So
Okay, so after that first date, did you not date anymore, or did you settle? How did it move into just a friendship?
yeah, there were three basic dates early on. So that initial one on October 22nd, and then when I came back for Christmas break, she made me dinner, so I had dinner at her house in Steubenville. And then I mean, again, if she were here, she could tell me the exact, I think maybe in February or March of that, winter, spring, we went on another date. And so we were talking on the phone, and we were, writing. But yeah, at the time, and I hate to say this because I love my wife so much now. I'm so thankful that it worked out. But I just, for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm. It's
I
good.
don't
No,
know.
it's
I mean,
good.
I'm sure we could, talk about it for an hour, maybe why. I mean, I had the two engagements previously, and, even
Oh,
in the
hello. Right.
times, uh, I have to say, I was living a faithful Catholic life. But even that initial relationship with, that first girl that I lived with, young woman that I lived with, it was not a healthy relationship. And so I think there is long-term effects and damage to that. And now I have to say, for the men out there, thankfully, I mean, once I got back to the church for many years, I went to daily mass and, and frequent confession. And so, some of those things that might be a problem for some men, and I only credit God for this, but, I was not using pornography. I was not, I was
Right.
fully on board with the church's teaching. I mean, I didn't
Right.
need to be convinced of that. And, I was living that as, I think pretty well. There were, I was going to confession and things, but, certainly
Right.
nothing like, deeply pathological or anything like that. Uh, but still, I think, in your 30s, you have a lot of history. There's a lot of water under, the proverbial bridge there. And so I don't know. I mean, I think, Emily and I have talked about this on and off over the years, like what you might expect when you're 19 or 23 about meeting somebody, and what you might feel when you're 35, 36, 37 might be different. It's a different stage of life.
Right.
There's a lot that you bring to the table. You're not dating when you're, I love these stories, and I do encourage my high school students, that, some of you will marry your high school sweethearts. And I love that when it works out, but, many of you are not. You're just not.
Right.
And, but,
Right.
if, especially after the sexual revolution, just what you expect and what might happen when you're 35, 36, 37, the feelings might be different. And I have to speak, as, obviously as a man, who is somewhat philosophical, intellectual. We also, and I think some men share this issue, we make it an abstraction. So it's we approach it like reading a text and like, oh, what is the issue here? What is the problem? You know, oh, is this the truth? I mean, at least for me. And so when you meet a woman who's a real person, you can treat them as an abstraction, like, oh, well, is she the one? As if there is like you're gonna know on the first date. I mean, you
Right.
might. I mean, some
Right.
do, but I do think there's a certain, not to impugn anybody, but I think there's a certain purity of heart that needs to be in place for that to happen. You know, the love at first sight needs to be early in your life, or you need to be, I think, a person of deep purity, where blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Their vocation may present itself very immediately. Now, Emily was convinced of me very early on, I think partly because she had lived a certain kind of life, which maybe allowed her to see that. And I did not see it immediately, obviously. So it was, from 2005 when we started writing to 2014. At the very tail end of 2014 is when we started officially dating. And so there were times in there where we were spending time together, because I moved back to Pittsburgh in 2007. So then we were very close, to each other geographically. Pittsburgh and Steubenville are not very far, 30 miles, 35 miles, whatever it is. And so we would go on, they were dates of a sort, but it was more friendship, we had those awkward conversations, and again, I hate to even think about it. Well, maybe, you will, should I pay for this? Is she going to pay for this? This is just a friend date. It's just, so those
Yeah.
kind of things. And so, there's, hurt
Were,
feelings
were,
on her side. And
Chris, were you dating other people during this 9 years of friendship with Emily?
yeah, there were some other women in there. I was on Catholic Match on and off during that time. And, there was one woman that I went on a number of dates. I mean, I would say we never became boyfriend and girlfriend, but, there was interest on my part, and we went on more dates. And I think I hurt her in some ways, because we kind of got into, here we are in our early 40s, like hanging out, which,
Right.
I was just lost at that time, really. I just, the more I was doing, it was just getting later in life, and it was more difficult in trying to figure out who I was and what I was. I had some health issues. In fact, that's an important part. I mean, I think of the story is in 2012, I started losing weight, and it turned out I had my kidneys were shutting down.
Oh,
And really, for years, I'd been like self-medicating with like supplements and things, because I had some mysterious issue, which for the most part I can navigate. But I'd say like 2005, 6, 7, 8, there were like different things were happening, and it was affecting my health. So that, I think, brought a lack of clarity. And so what came to a head was, I mean, my kidneys started shutting down. So in the summer of 2012, on my 44th birthday, I was admitted to the hospital. I'd gone to the doctor, which I hadn't been to a doctor for a while, but I had lost like 40 pounds. And so I went to the
wow.
doctor, and he called me that morning on my birthday. He said, "Chris, you need to be in the hospital like now. You need to go to the hospital
Whoa.
now." And so here's the thing. In retrospect, I called Emily, and I had another friend, Angela, who's just, I mean, a good friend. I don't want to say just a good friend, but I mean, she was a good friend, and we had gone out to breakfast that morning, and she came to the hospital with me. And Emily came, and my blood pressure had spiked, into obscene numbers, like 230 over 120.
Whoa. Whoa.
Yeah, so they admitted me for 6 days to try to find out what was going on. And but during that time, I mean, my other woman friend came to visit, which, but what I realized,
Wait. You had another woman
well, this other
friend?
woman I was alluding to, and she was a good
Okay.
friend, and a very devout Catholic, all kinds of good qualities. And Emily came, and so that's just kind of my joke was, Emily talks about it as like this Mexican soap opera where Emily didn't know this other woman existed. And so here I'm in the hospital, and I'm like, Lord, what have I done? Clearly I'm not living the right kind of life, because it was very tense. Emily was not.
Well, hello. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, strictly speaking, I mean, we weren't dating, so there was an obligation, but still, it was embarrassing and just difficult, and my health was precarious, and I was like, what is going on? My life is such a mess. And but what I did realize was, I felt comfortable with Emily in the hospital, like,
Mm,
and this is what I would say to older men, maybe, who have a woman who's been in their life for a long time. And at that point, so 2012, we had known each other for 7 years. Is, why, who would you call if you went to the hospital? Like, who would you want
right.
to help. Who are you entrusting yourself to? And I don't mean in a manipulative way, like I need help. But if there's a friend that you've been friends with for a long time, and and life is maybe overwhelming you, and you're like, oh, that's the person I need. Um,
Yeah, who
that
has your
tells you
back?
something that
Yeah.
maybe you're not recognizing, like why this person and not this other person, whatever. So now I got out of the hospital, and again, how it all works out. 2012, I think early 2013, Emily and I started spending more time together, and at times it was very datey like. But it took me a few years to really kind of recover and get my health back. And so then I was kind of suspicious. I was like, well, we're spending time together, but I pushed her away a number of times. Maybe it's just because I just didn't know how to read the situation, and so I
You
would
mean
move
from
forward.
from your own standpoint, you weren't sure about your own interior motives?
Yeah, just I mean, and even at that point, I was also like, I'm 45, I'm 46. Like, am I supposed to get married? I mean, those
Mm.
questions had kind of changed too. Like, maybe I'm just going to be single. Maybe, why did I push Emily away before, but now, we're spending time together. But is so in another interview I'd done about this, whatever, no man likes to compare themselves to George Costanza, but but I probably have to, I'm of a certain age, so I love Seinfeld, and lots of people, maybe 40 and up, people are Seinfeld fans. Where there's the episode where George realizes that everything always backfires on him, so maybe he should do the opposite of what he's been doing. And
Oh,
it works out. And so that was kind of where I was with Emily. I was like, well, why am I concluding that I shouldn't date Emily? Like, why? I've just got stuck into this just thinking about
right,
it. And we had friends. Emily and I traveled together a couple times. Like, we went up to Canada to visit her family. And what is life when you're married, but traveling through life together?
right,
So I
right,
enjoyed traveling with Emily. I felt comfortable with her. And now at this point, we had a fairly long shared history. And so we went down to Greenville, South Carolina. And in the backdrop, or in the background, I should say, Emily had a number of women telling her that she should just like get Chris out of your life. Like, you are foolish. This guy's not coming around. He's a mess. Sure, yeah, he's a nice guy, but like, this is just fruitless. And she had resolved, like, come hell or high water, she was willing to just persevere in a friendship if that's
mm,
what it was going to be. And so um, but I was feeling guilty, and I don't know, just I mean, all kinds of feelings there.
mhm.
And we went down to South Carolina, and my friend Laura, we were staying with my friends Michael and Laura, and I think Laura kind of tried to just, I mean, confront Emily about, like, what are you doing? Like, and they were great friends of mine, some of the closest friends I've ever had. But I think maybe for Emily's sake or my sake, they were just like, Emily, like, you should
Right.
not be spending this much time with
Yeah,
him.
dump him, dump him. Yeah,
Right. But that was the trigger. She was just so upset about that. We talked about it. And that's when I thought, I'm wrong. Like, we really are basically dating. Like, this is de facto dating without calling it dating, because we're spending all this time, we're traveling together. And that's where I just kind of did a flip in my head. Like, I need to date Emily and find out for real. Like, like, we're really doing this, but we're not naming it properly. And it's not her fault, it's my fault. So that was that visit down to South Carolina. I remember we went to,
did you tell her that?
yeah, I mean, we had a long conversation. We went to Abbeville, I think is the name of the town in South Carolina, spent the day together. And I said, let's date, let's date, let's give ourselves to this. And of course, then she was like, are you sure? Like, because why are you doing this? And but I was like, no, this, I've been foolish. And here's the thing I think that helped is, like, Emily was restraining herself for years because she really did care about me. But when you're in the friend zone, or um, you
Right.
have to restrain yourself. So that makes that makes you kind of awkward too, because you're like, well, I really feel this way, but I can't express that. And, so
So one day, so every day for her, it's not really safe to go over that line. But then one day you go, okay, let's open the door and you can come on in. And she's like, well, wait a minute, right?
yeah. So, well, I mean, then, we're adults and we had to navigate that. So there was the newness of it. And,
Right.
so that was December 2014, and she went home to her parents for Christmas, but came back, and we just, I mean, it was dating. I mean, to reveal things, kiss and tell, but I kissed her fairly early on. I mean, we had a long history there together, so I didn't feel like it was like this was ridiculous. We hadn't just met, and so we
Oh,
gave it.
I'm getting goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps. Come on, we're getting close here.
So that was December 2014. Now, I guess, my cavalier attitude, and, I had been engaged twice. So when I entered this, in my soul, I had a steel will at this point. Like, there is no way in heck that I will propose to this girl and not marry her. Like, that is not happening again. Like, the first
Yeah.
time, all right, you make a mistake. The second time, utter humiliation. I think, so if I propose, we're getting married, and if I'm not going to propose immediately, but there were some bumps, not big bumps, but I thought maybe my presumption early on was, well, we've known each other so long, we'll probably get engaged quickly. I think, and so just internally, I thought, well, I wouldn't be shocked if it's March or April and we get engaged. And of course, Emily, she's 7 years younger than I am, so but. I guess I was 46 when we started dating, 2014. Or, yeah, I guess 46. And she's 39, 40 years old. So there is. I'm very aware. I mean, I'm not stupid. I
Right.
teach, I talk about dating, I talk about marriage, which maybe not hypocrisy, but inauthenticity there. Like, hey, bud, you're not even married. You're in your 40s, and you're teaching kids about dating. I certainly was learning from it, from my own mistakes and miscues. But, so I knew I was on the clock. And so March, April comes around. I think June, there was a time, like late June, we were going to go back. And for maybe a 72-hour period, I got anxious because I wasn't, at that point, I still wasn't sure. And I think that made me a little nervous because we were 6 months, 7 months in, and I wasn't sure. And we were planning on going home to her house. Her parents are in Illinois. We're in Illinois. Her father died last year, but so we were going back.
Chris, let me ask you, do you
Sure.
remember what your last holdouts were, what your last fears?
Well, I mean, just is Emily the woman I want to marry? Need to marry, and even at that point, like, should I get married?
Okay.
I mean, even the sort of general question is like,
Yeah.
should I get married? I mean, I'm single for this long. I'm kind of used
Right.
to life, and uh, so I mean, and again, it was just going through a year with her too, to know her as a girlfriend, as a woman now that I'm contemplating marriage with. So
Yeah.
I shifted out of, like, she's a friend and she's dear to me, but I don't think she's the one I'm going to marry, to dating, like, oh, maybe I need to consider Emily. And I think to honor Emily in this, like, in the jeweler shop, which at one point I knew very well because I was actually in the jeweler shop, one of the two plays I was ever in.
Which is
So I,
John Paul II's.
right, John Paul II's play in the first act, and I should know their names, but I can't recall. In fact, I haven't looked since my previous interview about this. I should have looked, but they take a while to get to each other, and she's biding her time next to this guy, and he's interested in other women, but at some point he says, like, I had to be interested in her, and so that really is really Emily for me. At some point, like, it was just like, come on, buddy, what's not to be interested in? She's super
Right.
smart. She's a devout Catholic. She's lovely. Like, okay, you got stuck in some, impression of her, but you just have to overcome that. Now, I actually did make the right decision about this, which wasn't par for the course for me, but I think it was late June, and we were thinking of going back. We were going back to Illinois, and I got anxious again for a short period of time. It might have been 36, 48 hours. And Emily, out of care for me, but she said, well, maybe you shouldn't come home with me. I was like, oh, no, I don't think that's the right idea. Like, we need to do what we said we were going to do, which is I'm going back to your parents' house, and, we're going to spend time with your family. And sure enough, it was just like a little rain. I don't know. I mean, when you're
Right. Right.
dating, and you're thinking about marriage, you get, I mean, at least from the man's
It's a little
perspective,
flare up. Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
this is a big deal. And, so I think once we got past that, it was pretty smooth sailing. So that trip ended up being really good. And so we came back, and I was getting more sure. So July, August, I think by September, I was convinced, that I was going to propose. And I think somewhere around then we had a talk, because of course she was getting worried because we now are dating 8, 9 months. And I think I was able to assure her with, pretty good confidence. but then I was thinking, okay, timetable, and she wanted a ring that her grandmother had had, and so I can't remember that, I should remember these things, but I think maybe at Thanksgiving, I knew, and then it was just a matter of like, all right, how am I going to do this? Now it ended up not being super romantic. We went home for Christmas. While we were in Steubenville, actually, I think I was going over her house for dinner before we went home for Christmas. I called her parents, asked her dad, if I could propose to her. So when I came home, her parents knew that was coming up pretty soon, and her mother had to get me the ring. And so when Emily knew that the ring was gone, she knew that was doing some backdoor
Oh, I'm going to get them.
machinations. But then I thought, I was going to be the Catholic and propose on Epiphany when we got home. And
Right.
I actually carried the ring around with me, even when we were back in Illinois, and thinking, well, maybe I should propose here or there. But I wanted to do it back where we lived. And but then I got really sick on Epiphany. Like I had a really
Mm.
bad flu. I had a temperature, so we ended up not getting together. And at that point, I think we got engaged on January 8th. And so I was still sick, and I drove down to her house in Steubenville on the 8th. I mean, I was starting to feel a little better, but I was still sick. And then it was kind of just business, like, just propose to the girl because she, we were talking about marriage venues and stuff. So, I proposed on her couch, in her living room.
Oh,
That was January 8th, and we were married by July 1st of that year.
oh,
So my wife, those who read Emily or see her online, she is the most productive person I've ever met in my life. Her bad day of being productive is probably my best day. And, so once she was on it, like
oh,
venues,
yeah.
all the stuff, it all fell into place. And so I've been a very happy husband ever since. And I've thanked her many times for, her patience
Mm.
and, sticking around when other women would not have stuck around. And, so we're very
Yeah,
happy.
especially with the pressure from the girlfriends, you
Yeah,
know?
right.
Yeah.
So
That's a hard one to overcome. But this is it's happily ever after, right?
it is. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what advice I have for people, but, everybody has their own story. But I would say to the
Right.
men, it's possible, you might be thinking about a particular woman in the wrong way, and in the sense that, there's somebody right in front of you, and I mean, I think that can be an issue with Catholic Match. And, and I was on Catholic Match before I think I got on Facebook in 2010. So maybe there was a little overlap in there at some point. But at some point, I just got off because I was just too stressed out. And, it turned out in God's providence, too, the woman I was looking for, I'd already met and was friends with. And, but, there's all, I'm sure you talk about this a lot, but, there's just the selection, the browsing, and it's hard because, you want to treat everybody as a person. But that initial of just, and again, I don't even know what it looks like now, but, the scanning or, there's just the modern world gives you lots of options in the abstract, and that becomes its own problem. And there may be somebody right in front of
Yeah.
you, like a real person. I think that was something about Emily that caught me in her description. And again, I certainly didn't memorize it, but it did strike me as like she was very interested in like the real person, like getting to know somebody, building a history together, and learning people's faults and failings, their warts, their weaknesses, which we all have. Um,
Right. So the
totally marrying a
online
real person. Yeah.
right, so the writing and the online stuff is helpful. It's really good, but it has its place and it
Right.
has its limits.
Yes.
Okay, so I wish we had more time to hear the rest of the story. Maybe that'll be another interview. But let me ask you
I'm
this
sure.
question,
Yeah.
especially for men. What would you say men who are on Catholic Match, but they're also going to like Catholic events
Yeah.
and meeting Catholic women there, but they're afraid to date those
Hmm.
women. They're they're hanging with them, they're going to mass and adoration with them, but they're hesitant and they will not. What would you say? Why how can they get over the fear of just saying let's just go out?
Yeah. I mean, it can be messy because there is the fear of being, of thinking, oh, I asked this woman out, and now 3 dates in, I'm going to break up with her, or 6 dates, or 4 months in, I'm going to break up with her. And if you've been through that a lot of times, you're like, oh gosh, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to do that to somebody, or I don't want that to happen to me.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, courage, right? I mean, for men, it's courage. I think, especially if you have your moral life in order, or striving to have your moral life in order. you just have to launch into that. I mean, I think, the thing that threw everything into relief for me was being in the hospital, being 44, and like, I am going to die someday. Like, I don't have unlimited time. Like, so what, if I, and that was part of my decision sometimes with Emily is like, because I knew the friendship was awkward. And I thought, well, if I died tomorrow, would I rather have asked her out to go to dinner and go to this event and spent time with her, or would I not? And I would rather have spent time with her. But then also that helps you, like, okay, but that's what marriage is, right? Till death do you part. You don't know, that you're going to be with this person for 30, 40, or 50 years. That's what you hope. But, you just live in the present and you say, well, I want to go to this thing and I want to take this woman, and I'm attracted to her and I enjoy our time together. Or, I mean, I think I'm going to enjoy our time together. Or then you do it. I mean, and you throw yourself in there, but you realize you are building a history together. And at some point, like that Mark Cohn song, walk through this world with me. When you start spending time with the person, then you're like, well, why can't you spend the rest of your life with this person? You spent the evening with them. How did that go? I mean, if you
Right.
spend an evening
Boy,
with them and then
that's
you're like,
great.
oh, well, I'd like to, on Friday, I'd like to see her again. I mean, you're just doing what marriage is, right? I mean, you're like, well, I'd like to spend time with them. And then I think, well, Emily and I, when we dated, it just, the growing closer together makes sense, So I was in Pittsburgh and she was in Steubenville, and I would drive there. And of course, at some point, you're like, it would be so much easier if we just lived together. As a married couple, like that's what marriage is. Wouldn't it be easy if we just woke up next to each other? Wouldn't that be nice? And we could just sip coffee and, instead of having to drive the 30 miles and you have to drive the 30 miles, so at some point, I mean, marriage just suggests itself to you like this, like, and I think for the man, if all these options are an issue, then you have to get realistic. Like, you're only and ever going to marry one woman. And my friend Michael, who's has a great, he's the one I referred to before. Michael and Laura had, I think, a very healthy marriage, and they had 6 kids. But when he was younger, he was discerning the priesthood, and this priest, I love how he put it too. He said, "Look, you're not giving up women if you become celibate. You're giving up a woman." Right. So, in the abstract, oh my gosh, I'm giving up women. It's like, no, you would only marry
Right.
one woman, and then you're limited. You limit yourself. And that's what a vocation is. You limit yourself. And that gets back to our original point, which maybe is a nice way to tie it up. Like, structure provides creativity, and creativity, love is creative. And so when you're married to one person, you're committed to learning how to love this person over time, because we change, and life changes and the circumstances. And, so when Emily and I got married, we didn't have any children. And then we struggled with infertility for a short period of time. Of course, we're older, so that was all very condensed. And we decided that we would like to adopt. And, Toby came into our life, and then Beckett, and then Ellie. And so our life, so much has changed and you can't foresee it, but, you just put, what is that Christmas special? You just put one foot in front of the other. So there is a kind of logic in dating where at some point you're like, look, yes, you could go on a date with somebody else, but then you're just starting over. And if you like this person enough to, you enjoyed their company last night, well, then
Right.
enjoy their
And
company next week. And then, start accelerating that and start really thinking about commitment. And that, that's the greatness of being a human being, is you can commit to somebody else. And God, God will give the grace. I mean, we all struggle in different ways, with that. I love, Tolkien has some wonderful letters to his son, which I share with the students. And one insight he has, and this is decades ago when he was talking to his son in the letter. He says, "Look, your soulmate is the woman that you married. You
right.
choose your soulmate."
Right.
No, I mean,
Right.
there is an element of looking at compatibility beforehand, but once you
Right.
make that decision of like, hey, let's spend the rest of our life together, let's show up at the church and have our friends and commit to it, you have found your soulmate,
Yeah, no,
right?
and
You
you
that,
grow into you grow into a soulmate.
right?
Exactly.
Yes, that's a
Exactly.
nice way to put it. Yeah, and you've obviously talked and thought about this quite a bit. So yeah, so I don't know. Again, getting back to the man, maybe in the abstract, like, oh, this needle in a haystack, like, who is my soulmate? Well, I mean, yes, theoretically, there are probably a number of people we could be compatible with, given
That would
different
make that would
circumstances. But
make
in God's
lovely
providence, like,
spouses.
you make a commitment to this person, and
That's
that's the
correct.
beauty of it. So,
That's correct. And when you do, and you've done your due diligence and given it enough time, It doesn't have to be 9 years for everybody, but
No, it
maybe,
doesn't.
maybe,
All
maybe
the
for
women out
some.
there, you can
Right,
do it.
but right, but you guys, the unique unrepeatability, not only of just your persons, but your story and your dating and your courtship and
Right.
your marriage. So,
Yes.
well, thank you so much for sharing this. I know that you've been an encouragement to so many people who are listening, to not give up, to be courageous, to take that first step, to look inward. This is what you also shared. Look inward and see where am I stuck? How can I get unstuck? And I love you brought an internal picture. Look, if I die, who do I want to call? Who do I want to be with me? Or I want to go to the hospital.
Right.
So it's all good. So thank you. Tell Emily we said thank you for letting a part of her story come through yours. And
Absolutely.
any last words for the men and the women out there?
Persevere, persevere. I mean, it is, I was in a desert, of a sort for, a good decade, and it can be frustrating, and, uh, I persevere. I mean, at the end of it all, every tear is wiped away. That's the goal for all of
Right,
us. And of course, when you get married, I mean, that brings its own challenges and
right,
things you want to find a person you're compatible with. It's better to be single than maybe to, just, to settle. I mean, that's its
right,
own
right,
conversation there.
right.
But, I love being married to Emily, and yeah, so persevere. But that's so much of life, it's just day to day. I mean, God is the eternal present, right? So you live in the moment, and ask, and beg God for the wisdom, and beg God for love and friends. I mean, that was a consolation for me through so many years of singleness. Is So I've been blessed with many good friends. Some of whom are still single, some are married couples. Maybe to married couples out there too, if they're watching this somehow, like, be attentive to your single friends. Like,
Right,
you
right.
have your family time, but don't, to your family is a vocation. So hospitality and generosity of letting other people share in the joys of your marriage and family, by including your single friends in
Yeah,
there. And
because
that's sometimes how you find your spouse.
we're part of a bigger family.
Right.
We are part of a bigger family too. So yes, we're all in this together. Well, thank you so much again, Chris, for being our guest. And we'd love to have you come back again sometime and share some of your other joys and sufferings of being a good, solid Catholic man
Well,
who
thank
wants
you.
to live a good, solid Catholic
I'd
life.
be honored to come back. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, everybody, we will see you on Catholic Match Live next time.